Mark Tanner wiped the sweat from his brow as he crouched low in the underbrush, the alien wilderness of Azure 7 pressing in around him. Towering, iridescent trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves casting a soft, multicolored glow over the forest floor. The chirps and clicks of unseen creatures echoed in the distance, but Mark's focus was on the faint trail of scorched vegetation ahead. Something, or someone, had crashed nearby. He adjusted the strap on his pack and moved forward cautiously, his years as a Marine urging him to stay alert. When he rounded a large moss-covered boulder, he froze. Amid the wreckage of a small spacecraft was a figure, small, trembling, and unmistakably alien. The child looked fragile, with smooth, pale skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her eyes were wide and cat-like, their golden hue almost hypnotic, and her feathery hair fluttered slightly as she drew shallow breaths. She was curled up against a broken fragment of the ship, her arms wrapped protectively around her knees. Mark scanned the area. No signs of others. No sounds of movement except for the faint hum of the planet's ecosystem. She was alone. The girl flinched as his boots crunched on the gravel, her glowing skin pulsing brighter in alarm. Mark stopped in his tracks, raising his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. "Hey there," he said, his voice low and soothing. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond, but her golden eyes tracked his every move. Her breathing quickened when he crouched a few feet away. He reached into his pack and pulled out a nutrient bar, unwrapping it slowly. The smell of synthetic fruit filled the air as he set it on the ground between them and backed away. Her gaze flicked from the bar to him, suspicious and hesitant. Mark stayed still, waiting. After a long moment, she leaned forward, sniffing the air cautiously. Then, with trembling hands, she snatched the bar and retreated to her original position. Mark watched as she nibbled on the food, her glowing skin dimming slightly as her fears subsided. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When she finished, he gestured gently toward her, pointing at the gash on her leg. The injury wasn't severe, but it was enough to hinder her movement. Mark mimed wrapping a bandage, then pointed at her leg again. She tilted her head, the gesture strangely human, and hesitated before extending her injured limb slightly. Mark moved slowly, pulling a first aid kit from his pack. As he cleaned the wound and applied a sterile wrap, she flinched but didn't pull away. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered, trying to fill the silence. As he worked, his eyes caught something glinting against her chest. A small medallion hung from a delicate chain, its intricate design almost hypnotic. The symbols etched into its surface were unfamiliar, but it was clear the object held significance. He pointed at it cautiously. "What's that?" Her hands shot up to cover the medallion protectively, her eyes narrowing. Mark raised his hands in a placating gesture. All right. It's yours." "Got it." The tension eased slightly, and she relaxed again, though her grip on the medallion remained firm. Mark sat back, taking in the situation. The girl was alone, scared, and injured, and he had no idea where she'd come from or who, if anyone, was looking for her. Leaving her here wasn't an option. "All right, kid," he said, rising to his feet. "You're coming with me." She tilted her head again, as if trying to understand his words. When he extended his hand, she hesitated but eventually placed her small, glowing fingers in his. Her touch was light, almost ethereal, but the gesture sent a surprising wave of trust through him. As they started back toward his homestead, Mark glanced over his shoulder at the wreckage one last time. Whatever had brought her here wasn't just an accident. He didn't know what kind of trouble she was in, but one thing was clear: by taking her with him, that trouble was now his too. Mark's homestead was a simple yet inviting refuge carved out of the untamed wilderness of Azure 7. The walls were reinforced with salvaged metal panels, and the interior was cluttered but homey, filled with remnants of earth, old books with frayed spines, a patched armchair, and a small shelf holding faded photographs. Kari's glowing eyes darted around the room, wary yet curious, as she stepped inside. Mark set his pack down and gestured for her to sit on the makeshift couch. She remained standing, clutching her medallion tightly. He sighed, rummaging through his supplies. Hungry again? He asked, holding up a packet of dried fruit. Kaori chirped softly, a sound halfway between a question and a statement. Her body language was unfamiliar, yet he could read her hesitance in the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. He placed the packet on the table and stepped back, giving her space. She watched him closely before inching forward and taking the food. Their exchanges were like this for the first few days, simple, tentative. Kaori spoke in trills and hums, her language unintelligible to Mark, but he began to notice patterns in her sounds. A high-pitched chirp meant excitement, while a low, mournful hum indicated sadness or fear. When she pointed to her bandaged leg and made a quick, sharp whistle, he guessed she was asking about the wound's healing. "It's fine," he assured her, gently tapping his own leg to mimic hers. She tilted her head, as if processing his words, then nodded slightly. Each interaction taught him something new. One evening, while repairing an old drone, he noticed Kaori watching him intently from across the room. Her skin glowed faintly, a soft blue that pulsed rhythmically. He realized it was her version of calm, contentment made visible. In return, he tried to share pieces of his life. He showed her a small hologram projector displaying a photo of a woman smiling in front of a garden. "That's Anna," he said quietly. "My wife. She would have liked you." Kaori chirped questioningly, pointing at the hologram and then at Mark. He chuckled. "Yeah, that's me. A long time ago." Her golden eyes studied him, and though her expression was alien, he sensed she understood the melancholy in his tone. It surprised him how much comfort her quiet presence brought, even as she remained guarded. She began to relax around him, and with that came glimpses of her extraordinary nature. Her skin brightened to a vibrant green one morning as she laughed, a soft, melodic sound, while watching Mark fumble with a cooking pot. Another time, her ears twitched, and she turned toward the sound of a bird in the distance before Mark even registered the noise. But her abilities weren't just limited to heightened senses. One night, as Mark cleaned his tools by the dim light of an old lamp, Kaori touched her medallion absent-mindedly. The intricate patterns on its surface lit up, projecting a shimmering image into the air. Mark froze, staring at the hologram. It depicted a massive palace with spires reaching into a sky filled with twin moons. The structure was ornate, its architecture alien yet undeniably regal. Kaori's gaze softened as she looked at the projection, her chirps turning wistful. "What is that?" Mark asked, though he knew she couldn't answer. The image flickered and vanished when she let go of the medallion, leaving him with more questions than ever. He dismissed it as advanced tech, but a nagging feeling told him it was more than that. Their bond deepened in unexpected ways. One afternoon, while gathering supplies near the edge of the forest, Mark heard a low growl behind him. He turned to see a predator, a sleek, four-legged beast with razor-sharp claws and glowing eyes, emerging from the underbrush. Mark reached for his knife, but the creature was faster, lunging toward him with alarming speed. Before he could react, Kaori stepped forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. Her skin flared to a bright gold, and an invisible force erupted from her outstretched hands. The creature froze mid-air, suspended as if caught in an unseen net. It let out a guttural snarl before being flung backward into the trees with a deafening crash. Kaori swayed, her glow dimming as she sank to her knees. Mark rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. She chirped faintly, exhaustion evident in her posture. He didn't understand how she had done it, but he didn't care. She had saved his life. He lifted her gently and carried her back to the homestead, her small frame light as a feather in his arms. That night, as she rested in the corner of the room, Mark sat nearby, watching her bioluminescent skin shift between faint shades of blue and green. "You're something else, kid," he murmured. She stirred slightly, her glowing eyes meeting his. For the first time, she reached out and touched his arm, a gesture of trust that needed no translation. Mark had just finished patching the roof when the sound of approaching footsteps reached his ears. It wasn't the cautious shuffle of a forager or the rhythmic cadence of a trader. It was deliberate, heavy, and purposeful. A chill ran through him as he glanced at Kaori, who was perched by the table, her glowing skin pulsing faintly in her usual calm. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice firm but quiet. She tilted her head, sensing his unease, but didn't move. He stepped outside, squinting against the harsh sunlight. 3 figures stood at the edge of his clearing. They were armored, their suits bearing scorch marks and scratches, and each carried a weapon slung across their back. The tallest of them stepped forward, his helmet reflecting the light. "Mark Tanner?" the man called out, his tone clipped and businesslike. Mark's instincts kicked in. "Who's asking?" he replied evenly, masking the growing tension in his chest. "We're here on official business. Looking for a fugitive. Female, small alien," the man continued, glancing around the clearing. His voice was detached, almost disinterested, but his posture radiated menace. Mark shrugged, crossing his arms. "Haven't seen anyone like that. Just me out here." The man nodded to one of his companions, who activated a small device. A holographic image flickered to life, displaying Kaori's face. Even in the crude projection, her bioluminescent features were unmistakable. Mark kept his expression neutral. "Looks like trouble. What did she do?" The bounty hunter stepped closer, his voice dropping. "She's property of a powerful family. Stolen from her rightful place. We're here to return her." Mark's gut told him the words were a lie. He gestured lazily toward the forest. "Lots of critters out there, some of them pretty weird looking. Maybe she's one of those." The man's eyes narrowed behind his visor. "We've tracked her to this vicinity. If you're harboring her, that would make you an accomplice. And trust me, you don't want that." Mark forced a chuckle. "I don't even like visitors, let alone strays." "You've got the wrong guy." The bounty hunters exchanged glances before the leader stepped back. "Search the area," he ordered, and the others spread out. Mark's mind raced as he re-entered the house, shutting the door firmly behind him. Kaori was still by the table, her glowing skin now dimmed to a faint gray. She'd heard everything. He knelt beside her, speaking quickly but softly. "They're looking for you. Don't make a sound, no matter what happens." He gestured toward the small storage hatch beneath the floor. She hesitated, clutching her medallion tightly, but a pleading look from Mark made her obey. She slipped inside the cramped space, and he closed the hatch just as the door burst open. The leader stepped in, his weapon drawn but lowered. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the cluttered shelves and worn furniture. "Nice place," he remarked, though his tone dripped with sarcasm. "Appreciate the compliment," Mark replied, keeping his voice steady. The man paced the room, his boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. "Funny thing about fugitives," he said, picking up a photo frame from the shelf. "They tend to find help in the unlikeliest places." Mark's jaw tightened, but he forced a grin. "You've got a lot of theories, don't you?" The man set the photo down and turned to face him. "If you're lying, we'll find out. And when we do, you'll wish you hadn't crossed us." Mark met his gaze without flinching. "Search all you want. Just don't touch my stuff." The bounty hunters combed through the small homestead, overturning crates and rifling through supplies. Mark stayed close, watching their every move, his heart pounding as they passed near the hidden hatch. After an agonizing eternity, they regrouped, finding nothing. The leader stepped close, his voice low. "If she shows up, you contact us. No second chances." He tossed a small tracking beacon onto the table before motioning for his team to leave. Once their footsteps faded, Mark waited several tense minutes before opening the hatch. Kaori emerged, her small frame trembling. She looked up at him, her golden eyes filled with fear. "They're not giving up," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We can't stay here." Kaori hesitated, then touched her medallion. The intricate designs lit up, projecting a series of fragmented images into the air. Mark watched as a chaotic scene unfolded. A regal chamber under siege, armored figures storming through, and a desperate escape aboard a small ship. Her chirps were soft and mournful as she gestured to the projection, pointing at the medallion and then to herself. Mark understood. Her family was gone, killed in whatever coup had torn apart her world. He leaned back, staring at the medallion. You're not just any kid, are you? That thing, it's how they're finding you. Kaori nodded, clutching it protectively. Mark's jaw tightened. His mind flashed back to Anna, to the day he'd failed to protect her during the colony attack. He wouldn't let it happen again. Not to Kaori. We'll figure this out, he said firmly. But first, we need to get out of here. That medallion's a beacon, and they're not going to stop hunting you. Kaori's eyes met his, her glow shifting to a faint green, hopeful, but uncertain. Mark stood, already calculating their next move. We'll need supplies, transport, maybe a ship. He glanced at the worn photograph of Anna on the shelf. I couldn't save her, he said softly, almost to himself. But I'm not letting them take you. Kaori stepped closer, her small hand resting on his arm. No words were exchanged, but the gesture was enough. Their bond was unspoken, but unbreakable. The hum of the hovercraft filled the air as Mark tightened the last bolt on its damaged frame. The old machine was a relic, rusted and battered from years of neglect, but it would have to do. He glanced at Kaori, who stood nearby, her glowing skin dim with exhaustion and worry. We've got one shot at this, he said, wiping grease from his hands. Once we're moving, they'll come after us. No stopping, no turning back. Kaori chirped softly, stepping closer. She reached out, her bioluminescence flickering faintly against the hovercraft's metal surface. Mark wasn't sure if it was her way of offering encouragement, or silently praying it would hold together. With a deep breath, he started the engine. The hovercraft sputtered before roaring to life, and the two of them climbed aboard. As they sped into the dense forest, the adrenaline began to mount. The initial leg of the journey was eerily quiet, save for the hum of the hovercraft and the occasional rustle of alien wildlife. But Mark's instincts screamed that it wouldn't last. Kaori clutched her medallion tightly, its faint glow a constant reminder of the beacon it emitted. It wasn't long before the sound of distant engines broke the silence. Mark cursed under his breath, glancing back to see the bounty hunter's sleek pursuit vehicles cutting through the trees. They're fast, he muttered, gripping the controls tighter. But I know these woods better than they do. He veered sharply to the left, weaving through a narrow path bordered by towering trees with bioluminescent trunks. The hunters followed, their vehicles more agile but less familiar with the terrain. Mark's eyes darted to a natural choke point ahead, a series of low-hanging branches that could slow their pursuers. Hold on! He called out to Kaori. He ducked just as the hovercraft burst through the branches, sending debris flying. Behind them, one of the hunters wasn't as lucky. His vehicle snagged on a vine, flipping violently and crashing into the underbrush. That's one down, Mark muttered, but the others were still on their tail. Kaori's chirps turned frantic as the hunters closed the gap. Blaster fire lit up the night, scorching the air around them. Mark zigzagged through the trees, pushing the hovercraft to its limits. Then, without warning, Kaori raised her hand. Her skin flared bright gold, and an invisible force rippled outward, deflecting a volley of blaster bolts. The effort left her slumping against the seat, her breathing shallow. Kaori! Mark shouted, glancing over at her. She lifted her head weakly, her glowing eyes meeting his. There was determination in her gaze despite her exhaustion. Mark refocused, his mind racing. Up ahead, the forest gave way to a rocky canyon. He smiled grimly. They'll never make it through there. The hovercraft dipped into the canyon, its engine straining as Mark navigated the tight, jagged pathways. The bounty hunters followed, their vehicles struggling to match his maneuverability. Mark activated a hidden switch on the hovercraft's controls, deploying a makeshift trap he'd rigged earlier. A series of small charges hidden in the canyon walls detonated, sending rocks tumbling onto the path. Two more hunters were forced to swerve, their vehicles smashing into the canyon walls. The leader, however, remained relentless. His vehicle roared through the dust and debris, gaining on them as the canyon widened into the outskirts of the colony. Mark and Kari had barely reached the edge of a mining outpost when the leader's craft skidded to a stop, blocking their path. The bounty hunter dismounted, his weapon drawn, and advanced slowly. "There's nowhere left to run," he said, his voice amplified through a helmet speaker. Mark stepped in front of Kari, his hand brushing the side of his hovercraft. A small mining drone sat latched to the vehicle, its power core glowing faintly. Mark triggered its activation with the subtle press of a hidden button. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with," Mark said, buying time as the drone powered up. The hunter sneered. "You're outgunned and outmatched. Hand over the girl, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Mark smirked. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." With a sudden hum, the mining drone shot forward, its core overloading in a controlled burst. The explosion knocked the hunter off his feet, scattering debris and disabling his vehicle. Mark grabbed Kari's hand, pulling her toward the colony's port. Behind them, the hunter groaned, clutching his side as he staggered to his knees. "You can run," the hunter rasped, blood seeping from beneath his armor. "But you can't hide. More will come. You've made yourself a target, Tanner. And her? She's worth more than your entire planet." Mark hesitated, his grip tightening on Kari's hand. For a moment, he locked eyes with the bounty hunter, then turned and continued toward the port. They reached the outskirts, where the lights of the colony flickered in the distance. Mark's mind raced with the hunter's final words. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But as Kari leaned against him, her trust evident in the way she clung to his arm, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't backing down. The colony's port was a chaotic blend of activity and disrepair. Traders haggled over prices, mechanics argued over failing engines, and the faint hum of ships coming and going echoed in the distance. Mark led Kari through the crowds, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. She stayed close, her wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings, her bioluminescent glow muted with unease. Mark's destination was a dingy repair bay tucked into the corner of the port. Inside, an older man hunched over a console, muttering curses at the flickering screen. "Still cursing at tech, Briggs?" Mark called out. The man turned, his grizzled face breaking into a surprised grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Mark Tanner. Thought you'd gone feral out in the sticks." His gaze shifted to Kari, and his smile faltered. "Who's the kid?" Mark hesitated. "I need your help. We're in trouble, and I need a ship." Briggs raised an eyebrow but motioned for them to step inside. "Start talking." As Mark recounted the events of the past few days, Briggs' expression grew darker. When Mark handed him Kari's medallion, the older man studied it closely, his fingers tracing its intricate designs. "This isn't just a trinket," Briggs murmured. He tapped a button on his console, scanning the medallion. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a vast star map and a symbol Mark had seen in Kari's memories, a crest of intertwined stars and wings. Briggs whistled low. "This is Aurelian tech. High-end, royal-grade stuff. If she's carrying this, she's not just anyone." Mark nodded. "She's the last of their dynasty. The hunters said she's the key to restoring order in their sector." "What does that mean?" Briggs leaned back, rubbing his chin. "The Aurelian dynasty was big. Their reach spanned half the quadrant, kept the peace between dozens of warring factions. When they fell, it left a vacuum. Chaos. Pirates, warlords, you name it. If she's who they say she is, she's a symbol. A rallying point. And a threat to whoever's in charge now." Kari watched the conversation unfold, her golden eyes flickering with comprehension. She stepped forward, her hands moving in swift gestures. The medallion's projection changed, displaying scenes of her people, their vibrant cities now dark and war-torn. She pointed to herself, then to Mark, her determination evident despite her small frame. Briggs frowned. "What's she saying?" "She wants to fight," Mark said quietly. The room fell silent. Kari's glow intensified, her bioluminescence shifting to a steady, radiant blue. Her gaze locked onto Mark, silently pleading for his support. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. She's just a kid. She shouldn't have to do this. Briggs shrugged. She might not have a choice. And neither do you, by the look of things. Mark crouched to Kaori's level, his voice gentle. This isn't going to be easy. If we do this, there's no going back. You sure this is what you want? Kaori nodded, her small hand reaching out to touch his. The warmth of her glow spread to him, a silent affirmation of her resolve. Briggs interrupted the moment with a cough. You're going to need more than determination. If you're taking on whoever's running the show now, you'll need allies, resources, and a hell of a lot of luck. Mark stood, his expression hardening. Then we'd better get started. Briggs grinned. I've got a friend, a smuggler. Crazy but reliable. She's got a ship and a knack for dodging trouble. I'll make the call. The next few hours were a blur of preparations. Kaori stayed close to Mark, watching as he worked alongside Briggs to secure supplies and map a route. The medallion's holographic maps served as their guide, its projection marking key locations where potential allies might be found. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the port in shadows, a sleek ship landed in the bay. The smuggler, a sharp-eyed woman with a confident stride, greeted them with a sly smile. Briggs tells me you've got a high-value passenger. Hope you're ready to pay in more than just gratitude. Mark gave a wry grin. We'll make it worth your while. The ship's ramp lowered, and Mark turned to Kaori. This is it, he said softly. She hesitated, glancing back at the colony. Her glow dimmed briefly, but then she stepped forward, her hand still clutching his. As they boarded the ship, the weight of what lay ahead settled over Mark. The bounty hunter's warning echoed in his mind, more will come. But as he looked at Kaori, her unwavering determination shining brighter than her glow, he felt a surge of resolve. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them into the sky. The port and the forests of Azure 7 faded into the distance, replaced by the endless expanse of stars. Mark leaned back, his thoughts drifting to Anna and the promise he had made to himself long ago. This time, he wouldn't fail. He had a new purpose, a new mission, and, in a way, a new family. Kaori sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The medallion pulsed faintly in her hand, its light matching the rhythm of her breath. Together, they were heading into the unknown, but they weren't alone. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about hope, about reclaiming what was lost, and about forging a legacy that would outlast them both.